Welcome to Martini Time and following the Dharma Trail. And happy trails to you. You know, I was just laughing. Excuse me a minute. I just laughed to myself because, I have my Martini Time at 5 o'clock, happy hour. And I use my father's watch to time. Just to give me an idea how long I'm talking. I don't have any, it's not a stopwatch or anything, and I'm just amused by this because my father, I didn't get much from my father, but I did get the discipline of happy hour from him because he would he would look at his watch, say, is it 5 yet? Is it time for a highball? So he would be 5 o'clock, get out the highball. And, so anyway, I use his. So the other neat thing is that I maybe, if I'm early or if I'm late, I set the clock at 5 o'clock. So it's always 5 o'clock. If I'm 5:30, 6, whatever time I do this, it's always going to be 5 o'clock. So I thought I would talk today about. Usually I do my talks on what comes up during the day that interests me. And a friend of mine was here today. We were talking about, and I suddenly was talking about taking your shoes off in the house. And I never really encountered that practice. I never had to take my shoes off in the house until I started practicing yoga 1970. Now this was spiritual yoga in the sense that you had a guru and you had Hindu mythology and you had a japa, you do mala, get a mantra, and it had a spiritual goal. Not like the mall yoga we have now, which is physical fitness. This was Raja yoga, and it used the whole yoga map of India, as the practice of yoga, which is a very profound and deep practice. Anyway, so I entered into it in 1970, and it was in Cleveland Heights, and there was a Light of Yoga Society, and it had an Indian guru, Swami Rama, who would come when he visited the United States and bless everybody and all that, you see. And so I was introduced into this, and you had to take your shoes off when you entered the ashram, which was a big house in Cleveland Heights. And that was really, I wouldn't say exciting, but it was kind of profound. You just had to take your shoes off, and there was shoe racks there at the door, and you entered into this sacred space. And so everybody that practiced yoga didn't wear shoes in their house. So we had the shoe rack at the front of the door, and people would leave their shoes there. And it was just of course, go to Japan or you go to the temples in India, it's always been an ancient practice. But it's more than just taking shoes off because it's dirty. It's not that at all. It's a metaphor. And the shoe is a metaphor for the world. So when you enter a sacred space, you leave the world at the door. You leave your shoes at the door. And your shoes have laces and they protect your feet. So the shoe is like a protection against your vulnerable body against the world. So you leave your protections at the door. Today, people say, it might be today, leave your gun at the door. But anyway, the idea, the practice here is to go into the inner sanctum, into the sacred space, the temple, in your bare feet. And you feel the floor, and you're vulnerable now. People can step on your toes. You don't have boots on now, you see. You can't kick anybody's ass, you see. You're vulnerable. Bare feet are vulnerable. So, so this is a spiritual practice. And so all off and on, all through basically until we, I've lived in different places after 1970, and there was always a problem of taking your shoes off, And so I finally dropped the practice when we lived here in Blackstone, and my house became a photography studio. And it's very difficult to make customers coming to your house for a photograph to take off their shoes. So we just had to drop it, you see. And so now I wear shoes in the house, and it's still sacred, but I don't require people. And it's funny because then I go to my son's house, and they bought this brand new house, and for some strange reason they've been, they were not wearing shoes in their house, and so I was like, "You mean I got to take my shoes off?" It's kind of like Larry David. Damn, got to take my shoes off. I don't want to take my shoes off. So, anyway, but I expand this metaphor as I do now into what is a sacred space? Why is your home a sacred space, or a temple, or a retreat? Usually, if you go to any retreats, meditation centers or anything, you take your shoes off. Because it is a physical way of leaving the world and your worldly persona, your objective self, your image, your protection, your defense mechanisms in the objective world, you see. So the world is an objective world where everybody is an object. Everybody is a role. Everybody is a stereotype. Everybody is an object, a thing, a noun with a description, a definition, qualities, a profile, an image, a picture, an external thing. That's the world. And so we go out into the world and we need to be, what do we protect? We protect our inner. We protect our heart. We protect our subjective self, our center, our me, our heart, our vulnerable, sensitive, like a child. The subjective self is like a child, my inner child. And so we protect it with our defense mechanisms and our prejudice, you see, in our fears and our paranoia. And all of these things of the external world is basically to protect our vulnerable, barefooted inner child. And most of us, we bury it so deep we can't even find it. We don't know where we buried our child. In the basement? We don't know. In the cemetery? I don't know where we buried it. It's so deep in there. We can't find it. But we can hear it crying. We can hear its whimpering. It wants to come out and play in the grass with its bare feet. It wants to play in the dirt and have fun and play, you see. And play, you see. But we bury that in. The adult, bury that in there, you see. So when we go to a sacred space, basically what we're doing is taking our shoes off and we're going into a subjective space. And this is why people like to go to retreats or group sessions or any kind of sacred space where you're okay. In a sacred space, you're okay. You are forgiven. You are valuable for who you are, not how much money you've got or your job or your external objective life, you see. The subjective life has value in itself, not for what it's done or who it is or any kind of measurement. So you don't measure the subjective child, the inner child, with a ruler. And so this sacred space then is a place of non-judgment. And we always feel liberated and enlivened when we go to one of these places. We don't understand it. We feel this presence. We feel this peace. We feel this remembrance of something forgotten home. Oh, I felt at home there. Well, home is the sacred space. Home is where you're not judged. And so we can't wait to get home from the judgmental world, the harsh, rubbing external world of judgment and criticism and defense, you see, and attack and all of that, you see. So we can't wait to get home to our sacred space. So this whole idea of the sacred is, first of all, is not judgmental. You are okay. So anytime you have a friend, you're in a sacred space. If you have a friend that listens to you, and doesn't judge you and is there with you. Doesn't have to say anything, just being there with you as you. And you just open up, you just have fun, you just talk, and you become creative with that person. And there's a joy. That's sacred, you see. Sacred means complete. Sacred doesn't mean religious sacred, Catholic Pope sacred. No, it means whole. It means complete, not divided, you see. So when the subjective inner self is allowed to be external, when we're allowed to be that, we're only allowed to be that in a sacred space or in a non-judgmental place, you see. And so that's why people go to yoga and Buddhism and Zen and therapy and all these different traditions because they offer that sense of being home. These are my people. Well, they're not your people. It's just that this place makes you feel accepted and real, for your inner self. The beautiful inner self, you see. And that just kind of blooms out, and we love that. And then we go back in the world and we say, where did it go? Anybody who goes to a retreat always has the feeling of being at home and at peace, and then you go back, you put your shoes back on and you go back in the world, and immediately the stress of the world comes in like algae on a pond, and that clear little sacred space is gone, you see. Now I'm back in my old habits. I'm back in my objective self. Self-criticizing, criticizing others. Like bumper cars, you see. At the carnival, bumper cars. You're just bumping your way through life, you see. There's no center. Why? Because the center is subjective. The center is inside, and it has no measurement. It has no location on a map. It has no place where you have to go to get your center. Your center is who you are. And that's our subjective space, our sacred space, you see. So we really need to find a way in our life, in our practice, in our home, in your bedroom, someplace that is sacred, in the sense that here you can let go of the world. And now remember that the world is both external and internal. The inner mind is the world, and the world is the mind, you see. But we are conditioned to believe in our society that they are separate. The world is out there, and it's indifferent to me. And if the lights ever turn green for me, I'm saying, oh, thank you, Jesus. You see, called synchronicity or serendipity. The chance, circumstantial happenings where you're just in alignment and everything is going your way. And then that lasts a moment, and then the light turns red, you see. So even there, we call it a miracle, but that's because we live in a conditioned, objective world of things, and we don't really have a place in this world for this sacred inner child. It's not even on the map, you see. Science can't find it. Science can't find consciousness. Science can't find your inner self. Your heart, you see. It's all measured. It's all objective. So the scientific world is kind of like a analytical world, a scalpel world. It can find things if it just dissects it and cuts it up, but it can't find the whole. And it's the whole that is sacred, you see. Sacred means whole. Perfect. Perfect means whole. So there's no second. There's no division in the sacred. There's no analytical chopping it up into sausages of this and that, defined pieces of meat that you have good pieces and bad, like a butcher chops up the cow. These are the choice meats, and this is, hamburger. You see, so that's objective. That's the objective world. And we need that world. You can't do without it because you want to get a good piece of meat. You see, so you got to be able to know the difference between filet mignon and hamburger, right? But when it comes to our life, you see, then we are in trouble if we divide life up into filet mignon and hamburger. and then try to get better than our hamburger, or try to get rid of the uppity, arrogant filet mignon. You see, see. Anyway, so we're looking at just a fundamental idea of the sacred, and how in our I'll say spiritual practices is that we have little rituals that create the sacred, and taking off the shoes is one of them. And but however, I've discovered in my own life that there are 3 stages to the journey of finding the sacred. The first stage is the external world. The scientific, rational world says nothing is sacred. There is no sacred. That was the sky people in Avatar. There's no sacred. There's no home tree. It's just a tree. You see? So that's the objective world that we're conditioned to live in. And then we say something's missing. And then we have the second stage, and we say, well, this is sacred, and that's not sacred. So when I go to the temple, I go to the meditation, or the yoga, the Zen, or the Pilates, or the group, or the church, or whatever I go to, where I'm accepted for who I am, and I feel whole and complete. I say, oh, that's the sacred. But outside, that's not sacred out there. That's the second stage. The third stage is the most interesting. The third stage is when you discover everything is sacred. Not this or that. There's no scalpel dividing the world into the profane and the sacred. Everything is sacred. Everything is whole. Everything is perfect. But you can still get some filet mignon. You can still go catch a bus to go to Walmart. I mean, it's not that you can't do things and get better things. But you don't live in a world that's divided into the sacred and the not sacred. See, because the not sacred is objective things that have no value except relative to other things. And the sacred has value for itself, you see. So when you move to the third stage, if I get my fingers right, the third stage is that everything is sacred, because no matter where you go, you are at home. You are at home no matter where you go. If your house burns down, you're still at home. If your health goes, you're still at home. You're still okay. If you lose your money, you're still okay. If your coffee pot, I talked about this in Perfect Coffee. If your beautiful Jura coffee pot craps out, you're still okay. You use something else, and it's perfect. We're using the Keurig, and it's perfect now. I've forgotten all about my perfect coffee pot. Everything is sacred. Everything is perfect. You see, the chant that I remember from my guru in yoga was Om Purnamidam Purnamid. I can't remember it, but it means that is perfect. This is perfect. That coffee pot is perfect. It falls apart. This coffee pot is perfect. When you take the perfect from the perfect remains. So everything, or you could say the sacred. When you take the sacred, that is sacred, this is sacred. When you take the sacred from the sacred remains. You are perfect. You are sacred. And when you take something from you, you remain. You can't be divided, chopped up, made into a hamburger. So take your shoes off and relax. Thanks for dropping in. Oh, come on, Larry. Here we go.